Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, hi. Good evening. I'm Councilwoman Ontiveros-Cole, and I'm presenting this tonight for anyone who is interested in what we are doing with cannabis in our city of Pomona. We're going to have a great presentation by Gutierrez, and she is our director for planning. So without further ado, we're going to start. We don't want to waste time. There's a lot of things that we want to see, and questions and answers after the presentation. Thank you for coming.
I'm not her. I just wanted to welcome you to St. Paul's Episcopal Church. My name is Mark. I'm the rector here. And seeing this many people is a really good sign that you really care about your community, no matter where you fall in this issue. And we care about this community too. So just know that this is a place for you to come whenever you need a place to meet. The restrooms are outside, so please know that you can just go out those doors there to the restrooms. And if you are interested in a venue, like for wedding, we have information on weddings here. So just a little bit of sales pitch for St. Paul's weddings. And it's a beautiful space. If you walk around, you'll see a lot of space. We do weddings, we do LGBT weddings, so you're more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, and thank you, Councilmember Cole, for hosting us this evening here tonight. So again, my name is Anita Gutierrez. I'm the Director of Development Services. Myself and my team here with Linda Lara and Atal Khan, we're working on the zoning piece for cannabis. And so for this evening, we're here to talk about planning for cannabis. Specifically, what we want to cover this evening is what's been done so far. Where are we at now in this whole process? And what are we working on? And what's kind of our end timeline and our end goals here? We've been talking about cannabis for maybe a year or two here in the city of Pomona. In the last year, quite a bit has happened. And so we're here to talk with you about that. We will have, after our brief presentation, which will be about 15 minutes, we will have a Q&A section, so you're free to ask any questions that you have. We'll be responding to you. The goal is to hear your input, answer your questions, and go from there. So with that, from the timeline. So November 2018, last year, there was a citywide election, and the voters unanimously passed Measure PC, which was the commercial cannabis business tax. And that established up to a $10 per canopy square foot for indoor cultivation of cannabis, and up to a 6% of gross receipts for all other cannabis businesses. So what that did, it set the stage for the city to be able to permit businesses. It didn't allow them yet, they're still prohibited. All current cannabis businesses operating in the city are illegal. This set the stage though for the city to adopt an ordinance to legally permit them and then collect the tax. So next, in April of 2019 of this year, the city took the additional step of adopting the Cannabis Business Ordinance. That ordinance did a few things. First, it established a 4-phase merit-based system, and by which applicants will be able to apply and be scored based on a point system, and then awarded, ultimately, a cannabis permit. The 4 phases are application, initial scoring, public presentation, and that was particularly important to the City Council to have a public component of this so that the citizens can be involved and know who's applying and what they intend to offer. And phase 4, the final ranking and permit issuance. Currently, the city is exploring 8 licenses, and I think we'll get a little bit into that later in our presentation, but currently what the city is exploring is 8 licenses, 2 retail, 2 micro business, and the 4 for manufacturing, distribution, and cultivation. Second thing that the ordinance did was establish the 1,000-foot buffers for sensitive uses. In our business ordinance, sensitive uses are defined as K through 12 schools, daycare centers, youth and recreation centers, and also a 1,000-foot buffer between cannabis storefront businesses. And this is the criteria by which we created these maps here that you see, which we'll also get into a little bit more in a moment. And the third thing that the business ordinance did, but was defined the types of cannabis permits that will be issued. So again, I just reiterated that the city is exploring 8 licenses: storefront, retail, storefront or delivery, indoor cultivation, manufacturing, testing, and distribution. Those are the permit types. Next brings you to current time. So since May into now and into next month, what we're doing is having community workshops, talking to the community, talking to stakeholders, doing field visits. This is the 3rd community meeting that we've hosted. We'll be hosting one additional one Tuesday night at Westmont Community Center. And then currently, during this time frame, staff we're doing facility visits. So we've toured retail, lab testing, manufacturing sites, cultivation sites, to see firsthand what these look like, what we can expect in the city, how we can develop standards to regulate them appropriately, so that way we can ensure what we're getting here in Pomona is regulated and controlled. We've talked with state agencies, all the agencies that regulate these businesses, state public health, Bureau of Cannabis Control. We're talking directly to the regulators who regulate these businesses, again, so we have the most informed knowledge to be able to write this ordinance and regulate them appropriately. We've talked with local jurisdictions. Only currently 80% of the cities in California prohibit cannabis, so we're the 20% of cities that are allowing it. So we're talking to other fellow local jurisdictions who've done it, what they've done wrong, what they've done right, how we can learn from it. So we're not starting from scratch. We're talking to our neighbors and really trying to bring forth the best ordinance that we can here in Pomona. We're also studying academic papers on the issue and considering California virus screen. All of those factors will be going into, in addition to these community meetings, hearing directly from you, your concerns, will be going into developing the zoning ordinance piece of this project. So that'll be we've been doing that since May. We'll be wrapping up the community meeting next week. And then in August, we intend to take all that information and analyze it and come up with a revised map based on all of that input. Then September through December, we plan on going to Planning Commission with a recommendation, as well as City Council for adoption. Probably early September, we plan on coming to City Council with an update, just to give them an update of what we've learned so far, where we're at with the process, what to expect, and that would also be public information. And at the end of our PowerPoint, we will put up our website, where we're posting all information, all of our PowerPoints for this evening. Anything that we've done to date will be up on our website. So that takes us to probably the end of the year. And then our hope is by spring 2020, preferably a little earlier, and we're pushing as hard as we can to get it done as quickly as can, but without skipping steps, be ready to accept applications. And with that phase, we would hope that we would also have some public workshops to explain to applicants what the application process would be, how to apply, how it's worked. And so that's our timeline of where we're at, where we're going. The entire process, my intent and staff's intent is to make it as transparent as possible. We're available via phone or email to answer questions. We're constantly taking questions from the community, from businesses interested in what we're doing, how the ordinance is proceeding. So that's our goal, is to be transparent and to keep everybody informed and hear your comments and concerns. So with that, I'll turn it over to Linda Lara, who's going to talk a little bit about the zoning aspect piece and how that overlay and this map works into this whole piece here.
Thank you, Anita. So now I'm going to go over the cannabis overlay. So the cannabis overlay has a parallel relationship with our city ordinances. First, we have the business ordinance, which establishes the cannabis permitting in the city. Then we have our Pomona zoning code, which identifies which uses are permitted or prohibited, and it also outlines development standards for all properties in the city. Then we have the cannabis overlay, which is essentially an additional layer of regulation that sets special provisions just for cannabis. So what would the cannabis overlay do? Well, one, it establishes potential locations for this cannabis business. It identified permits types based on the cannabis permit areas, and it sets site design standards such as parking requirements or facade guidelines. What it won't do is it doesn't regulate the market, it doesn't establish trends, and it doesn't select individual businesses. So the first step in our cannabis zoning research was identifying where these cannabis permit areas are. So the planning division, what we did is we mapped all the sensitive uses, and those were the ones that were identified by the city. Once we got those remaining parcels, we then field investigated them for existing conditions, zoning, and general plan designation. With those CPAs, were then established based on the underlying land use type. For example, storefront retail would be located in a major corridor because it supports that type of use. So once we took account all the sensitive uses and the distance requirements, this is what we were left with, which is essentially the 12 cannabis permitting areas, or CPAs. The areas in red are manufacturing, distribution, and testing. The areas in green are retail, and the areas in blue are micro businesses, which Atal will go into detail more further in the presentation tonight. Tonight, we're going to focus on CPA 9 and 10, which are identified in our map as retail. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Atal.
Yeah, before we go to this portion, I just wanted to reiterate on this map. So this map will change. This was our first draft. Again, this took out all of the sensitive uses. What this mapped is where cannabis businesses could go. And again, what I've explained in my earlier presentation is what we're doing now is talking with the community, hearing the concerns, doing all the other analysis that goes with it, and then determining, coming up with an analysis of where the city wants them to go. So these boundaries may shrink. They most likely won't get larger because of the sensitive use buffers. They may get smaller though, depending on what we've heard and other uses. For instance, proximity to residential, things like that may alter the shape and size of these zones. So that is an important note to make there on these maps. And now I'll turn it over to Atal.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Atal. I'm a planner here in the planning division. I'm going to show some love to this side. We wanted to get into some frequently asked questions before we open it up for just general questions. Really our intent here, as Anita mentioned at the beginning, is we're showing all our homework. So as we learn more about cannabis, as we tour facilities, as we speak to state agencies, we want to share that information to you so we as collectively as a community can make an educated decision about zoning. So here are a couple of the questions that we've heard in previous community forums and also we've been getting at the counter. And so the first is, what are the types of cannabis permits and who regulates them? So in addition to the city of Pomona actually regulating through the overlay that Linda was talking about, there's really 3 state agencies. There's one brand new agency that was created just for cannabis. It's the California Bureau of Cannabis Control. You also have 2 existing agencies that are now involved in cannabis. That is the California Department of Public Health and Cal Cannabis, which is the Department of Food and Agriculture. So what do these 3 agencies do? California Bureau of Cannabis Control, they're looking at 4 key things. The first is retail, and that's either storefront retail or non-storefront, what we call delivery. So they're the ones issuing permits for those. Secondly, we have distribution. So in order to go from one cannabis retailer or manufacturer to another, it's illegal to do that unless you have a distribution license. And so that's also required and regulated by BCC. Third is what they call a micro business. So there's 4 parts to a micro business, and you have to do 3 of the 4 to be eligible. The first is you can have a grow operation up to 10,000 square feet. The second is you can do some kind of a manufacturing, like a type 6 non-volatile manufacturing. The third is you can do distribution, and then the fourth is you have a storefront retail. If you do 3 of those 4, you're constituted as a micro business. And so that's important because it's what the industry folks have been calling vertical integration, where they grow, they sell, and they distribute all in one warehouse. Lastly, you have testing. So as we've learned with some of the facilities that we've gone to, is that Cannabis is, any cannabis product that's going to come through the city of Pomona or in the state of California has to pass tests and has to be issued certificates by Bureau of Cannabis Control. And so there are labs that will specifically just be entrusted with testing. So the Department of Public Health, they're looking at public health and safety. So they're looking at two key things there. One is really manufacturing. So when we talk about using cannabis for the production of oils, for vapes, for cartridges, for devices, things like that, that's all manufacturing. They're producing waxes, dabs, shatters, things like that. That requires a manufacturing permit. There's two types, non-volatile and volatile. Those basically are just coming down to what kind of solvent you're using. So if it's volatile, you're using butane, hexane, some of the hydrocarbons. If it's non-volatile, you're using butter, water, CO2, dry ice, things like that. They treat those two differently. They have different distancing requirements from residential, for instance. And then secondly, they're looking at packaging and labeling. So anything that's going to have a product label on it, if there's a vape cartridge with cannabis and it's got a label, it's got to go through Department of Public Health and it's got to get approved. Cal Cannabis is really agriculture. So cultivation and cannabis in a nutshell is agriculture. And so they're issuing various licenses for indoor ag and outdoor cultivation as well. And that could be greenhouses, Dutch greenhouses, fully indoor mixed light, indoor light cultivation sites. And the permits are staggered by square footage. So you have up to 5,000 and up to 10,000. And then the maximum you can do is 22,000 square feet of indoor cultivation. So the reason this is important is because while the city of Pomona is regulating cannabis and we have overlays, these are all existing agencies that anybody who tries to operate in Pomona has to do right by it and get approved before they could even open up shop. And so you'll find there's a lot of parallels in our ordinance with the regulations set forth here and for air quality and things like that. Second question, and this has come up quite a bit, how does Pomona's cannabis business ordinance address social equity? So there's been a lot of conversation about social equity when it comes to the cannabis industry, when it comes to legacy impacts of the criminalization of cannabis and marijuana, and how that could be rectified or addressed through zoning and through how cities are issuing permits. We've seen in cities like Los Angeles, Long Beach, Oakland, they have established social equity programs that are trying to address this. Wanted to highlight how our business ordinance is taking a stab at social equity. And so the first is the merit-based four-phase process, but as part of that process, there isn't any automatic disqualification for past convictions. There is an opportunity for any applicant to provide a rehabilitation statement that indicates if they had a criminal record, say for the possession or sale of marijuana, that rehabilitation statement would address how they have addressed that, rehabilitated themselves, and are fit to actually operate a business. That is something that would be part of the scoring and the background check process that the city would engage in, that we would define in the implementation guide. Secondly, there are specific scoring criteria when it comes to labor and employment. And some of these are pretty unique just to the city of Pomona. So there are specific points awarded for applicants that are providing a 30% local hire for their cannabis business. That's local hire, Pomona residents being hired to work in cannabis. Secondly, points awarded for those businesses that are offering apprenticeship and continuing education and vocational training in the cannabis industry when it comes to any of those permit types that I addressed. Third is points for paying the living wage. And then lastly, having a labor and peace agreement if you have more than 5 employees. So these are 4 ways in which labor and employment from an equity standpoint is being addressed. Lastly, there's scoring for a neighborhood integration plan and public benefits. Those are additional points for how, as Anita mentioned at the beginning, it was quite important to have a public presentation component and engagement component. So we're going to be defining how each applicant that comes in will be engaging and being a good neighbor and how they prove that out. So those are all elements for social equity. Another big question that's come up is how does Pomona's zoning overlay, what Linda was explaining, address environmental justice? And so I want to walk through just a kind of hypothetical map here. This is CPA 11, what we defined as 11 is if you're living in Pomona, you're familiar with our industrial zone east of Reservoir, all the way up to East End and Mills. It's largely our industrial area. And so using that as an example, we Ontiveros-Cole identifies that as a pollution burden zone, and it's one that brings up questions of EJ. So if we grade this out, as planners, what we start looking at is, first we see there's a 63-way, which is establishing a physical barrier between homes that are on the north and some of those industrial uses that are to the south. If you're familiar with the area where Jack in the Box is located on Walnut, all of that area. That's what we call a physical buffer, and it's a good separation from residents and industry. Then as you look, you see immediately adjacent to Reservoir, all along the west is our single-family residential homes. So we have what planners call incompatible land uses, right? You have industry right up against residential. So we have to think about that in terms of what kinds of things are we letting in there and what kind of impacts those would have on residents. Furthering this analysis, these triangles represent, not exhaustively representing it, but just as an example, these are homes that are built before some of these industrial uses came into effect, and it's what we call legal non-conforming uses. And so you have homes within the industrial zone, and that also is a consideration for what kinds of uses are going into these homes that may have been there for 40 or 50 years. You have railroad tracks establishing what we call a distance buffer. And so taken together, we look at all of these things, and here's a hypothetical example of how an overlay could really be affected. Is you start looking at this and thinking, okay, cultivation, if you're doing it above 10,000 square feet, like I said, if you do it to 22K, if you're doing anything above 10K, perhaps you site it east of the railroad tracks, further distance from residential, or you start looking at the non-conforming homes and figuring out an appropriate location to site some of the manufacturing. So this isn't, this is just an example of the kinds of considerations we're taking when it comes to environmental justice. What are examples of cannabis storefront retail, and how do you prevent bad operators? That's a big question that's come up. A lot of jurisdictions are aware that you have legal businesses coming in and getting permits. There's illegal ones as well, and they're not paying taxes, and they can beat the market that way. And so that is a thing we're thinking of as part of our tours, and as what we're looking at. There's just some examples. This is connected in Long Beach. As you can see, and the photos might be a little dark here, but these are ranging from kind of Apple Store to just general storefront retail appearances. And so this isn't necessarily by accident. So as part of the overlay, as we think of design standards, as we think of signage, as we think of what kinds of storefronts we would allow, thinking about green crosses versus not having green crosses, things like that. That's a conversation we start having about aesthetics and design, and making sure that if there is a retailer that comes in to the city of Pomona, that if you're walking down the street on Holt, you may be indistinguishable from any other kind of storefront retail. That's essentially the goal. Conversely, you have illegal operators, and we've had some in the city of Pomona, and there are obviously no standards. There's it's a wild west, but the whole purpose of what we're trying to do is bring some regulations, some teeth, and some standards so that we can enforce those and regulate them and get good operators in the city of Pomona. So those are just 4 key questions that have come up. That was just to set the stage for anything else you guys want to talk about tonight. As Linda mentioned, we're focusing on CKs 9 and 10 right here along Cole. We're talking about retail. But with that, I wanted to just turn it back to Anita. And we can, if anybody has a question, and I encourage you to come up here and you can speak at the podium and do the formal line if you'd like.
Questions, we can just address the crowd, and we'll be addressing questions that we can answer now. If we can't answer, we'll be taking notes and follow up.
Awesome. So my name is Xavier, and I'm a Pomona resident, and I'm also a cannabis investor in Northern California. My question was regarding zoning. What license types have you already decided to move forward with?
Great question. Well, great question. We're considering 8 business licenses. The license types are retail, either storefront or delivery, manufacturing, testing or distribution or cultivation, and micro business. Those are the license types. You follow up question?
We're
affordability. I know I belong to a lot of senior citizen places. They can't afford the cannabis, and they were asking me to ask, are they be able to grow a few in their backyard or not?
Yes. So the question is if we can grow plants in your backyard. I believe under state law, 6 or fewer plants you're allowed to grow in your residence. Enclosed, not outdoor, per state law.
Inside,
Are you saying out of sight, out of mind?
It has to be enclosed, inside, not outdoor, per state law.
Good evening, Benjamin Wood. I'm one of the people that's concerned about environmental justice and social equity. And I also have another question that's not really related to either of those. But I understand that there's no, as far as social equity goes, I understand there's no automatic disqualification for past convictions. And that if applicants provide a letter of rehabilitation, then that would be considered. But I'm curious about the phrasing here because we do have to acknowledge that the drug war has had an impact, especially on the poor, and that there's also been a racial element of that impact. And so the question is, how is that weighed? Is it weighed favorably or unfavorably, if you're using that point system? So that's one really quick. And then the other question has to do with the products. Does that mean that only these cannabis businesses, the products are only going to be available at cannabis businesses, or is it going to be on the shelves at Stater Brothers and 7-Eleven and those kind of places too?
Thank you, Ben. I think for social equity, question was about
The merit-based application?
right, the merit-based, thank you. So I don't think, there's not a point scoring, a specific number of points allotted specifically for the background or rehabilitation statement. It is a consideration, is currently listed in the business ordinance. As we draft the implementation guide, we hope that will add some additional clarity on how that piece would be evaluated in the entire application process. And then in terms of products, would that be available at your local grocery store? No. It would only be, the cannabis products would only be allowed at legally permitted cannabis retail storefronts or through a permitted retail delivery location. And but I also want to draw some distinctions and go into what we've learned through some of these tours. There's a distinction between cannabis products and CBD products. CBD products, which you might see at your local grocery store, I've seen, and lotions and things, that is not regulated by the federal government. That is a loophole in the Farm Act. And so currently, that's why you see CBD products throughout your shopping places. Another important fact about that is that the CBD industry is not regulated like cannabis is. They're distinct. So CBD is still the cannabis plant with the extraction of the THC. But CBD is not tested. So all of the claims that you see on maybe a lotion or things like that, there's no one regulating to see that in fact those claims are true, and there's no one testing to see what is actually in that product. Whereas a legal cannabis business, through these labs, they test for salmonella, E. coli, heavy metals, lead. We found the most heavy abuser of heavy metals and lead is the vape cartridges, because this equipment comes from overseas, and when it's heated, this component, and it's inhaled in the lungs, has heavy lead and metals in it. So that lab they test for a myriad of things in the cannabis and cannabis-related products, and they have to clear the testing before they hit the shelves on a legal cannabis retail store.
My second question was, so regarding the zoning, is it going to be zoned for manufacturing, for retail in different areas of the city completely, or is it going to be all in one general?
So great question. So about the zoning. So if you look at those maps, and so the map over there, and we can pull it up. Clickers. We can pull it up, but currently it'll be zoned specifically. So on the map, and we'll pull it up in a minute. Currently, the pink represents the manufacturing, testing, or distribution, or cultivation. Green represents retail, and blue represents micro business. Again, and that might be a little hard to tell on that. There's a printed one over there, and it's on our website. But again, that may change as well. So for currently on this western, southwest portion of the city, our first take at it was maybe this is appropriate for manufacturing. Now that we're looking at it more and hearing from the community, that might be more of an appropriate place for manufacturing as well as maybe micro business. So that may change, but we will designate per CPA, we call these CPAs or cannabis permitting areas. We will be designating what permit type is allowed within each zone. And so for instance, over on CPA 11 and 12, where Charles was talking about on Reservoir, no retail will be allowed in those two CPAs. It would be strictly manufacturing, testing, distribution, or cultivation.
Have you also decided, like, for example, like in Humboldt, if I have to send my flower to a distribution hub, I have to pay for transportation from point A to point B. So in this city, right, because there's distribution, retail, like, have you considered license for transportation? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we have. So that's going to be, as we look at the different agencies that are regulating this, you saw that there was a distribution under Bureau of Cannabis Control. That would be potentially one of the 8 permits that could be issued under that catch-all for manufacturing, testing, distribution. That includes transport licenses as well. So that's something that if somebody wanted to do in the city of Pomona, they could get that license.
And it would have to be within that zone area, even though it's just transportation.
Well, so that's something we're looking at right now is how the overlay, if we are going to allow that kind of permit type, is it something that would apply to all the overlays just because it affects all the commercial and industrial? And so we haven't landed on that yet, but when we bring back the overlay draft, it's going to explain it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, didn't quite understand what you're saying about between the cannabis and the hemp. So they have, the hemp, I can do as much as I want here, or what? As long as it's tested. The hemp, I mean, growing, it's not legally, marijuana because the contents is lower than, you know, THC. We call it.
Yeah. So what we're looking at is just, yeah, it's coming from a hemp plant. That's the Farm Act was referencing. But as far as testing of cannabis, when it comes to these 3 agencies, CBD is not being tested by Cannabis, by these agencies that are located here. And so products that are on the market that could even be at a CVS, those are completely unrelated to the regulations that we're putting forward here and what the state's putting forward, because the state is specifically regulating the definition of cannabis. So that's, yeah.
Not unless we had an ag zone that would allow growing, which we don't, or outdoor, so.
Gotta see what you know.
I think we had a line.
Yes, ma'am, Jim Sambrano with the Latino Roundtable. I have a couple of questions about the cultivation. You mentioned the maximum of 22,000 square feet, and there's going to be 4 licenses. So 4 times 22,000 would be 88,000. So could you have 88,000 square feet of cultivation in the reservoir zone? And also the second question, you didn't put a limitation on manufacturing, volatile manufacturing. Is there a limitation on how much square footage of volatile manufacturing as opposed to non-volatile manufacturing, and that going to all be in the reservoir zone?
So those are excellent questions. I think when it, just to reiterate, so if there were 4 of those manufacturing licenses, if they all went to indoor cultivation, we'd have 88,000. And hypothetically, say they were just up and down Reservoir, Franklin, and Philadelphia, that's what we would consider a cumulative impact. That's as part of our analysis of environmental justice, we would consider the negative impact of having 4 of those, and so we factor that in. That's something we're looking at right now in terms of potentially reducing that square footage or capping how many of those you can have in that particular area. Secondly, when it comes to volatile manufacturing, we're considering it's already a distancing requirement. It can't be in residential zones, and per our conversations with state agencies, they encourage distancing from residences. As we illustrated, there are legal non-conforming homes in Reservoir, so we're factoring in the distancing from those homes if we were to allow volatile, or safe areas that are not adjacent to residential at all to allow those. So long story short is that it wouldn't just be a blanket application to Reservoir the way we would maybe apply it to another part of town. Each CPA is looked at for its existing uses and the existing impacts, and they're each unique, and so that's how we're going to be regulating them.
Just to add on to that, I think what we've also learned anecdotally through talking with business owners is we're most likely not the key location for cultivation because of the price of land, the price of utilities, climate. It's most likely not the ideal place for cultivation for these businesses. So I wouldn't expect for cultivation businesses to get those. But.
Hi, my name is Patrick. My question is about some concerns I've seen with other cities who have started to legalize and start this fall process is that they have a lot of current cannabis industry owners already waiting to apply. And I'm wondering what advantages, if any, would you give current residents and business owners based on your scoring system to get on this business instead of allowing current ones that are already flooding the market, basically?
So there isn't currently an additional point or points or percentage given to local Pomona residents. It's based on a merit-based system, so equal representation and equal chance across the board. It depends on the entire package that you're presenting as a business and what you can bring forward to Pomona. I think they put emphasis on creating the local hire and the collective bargaining agreements, certainly, but not specifically for being a Pomona resident.
Hi, my name is Greg Flores. My question was, how are you guys going to permit or, for cannabis events, like at the Fairplex?
There will not be cannabis events at the Fairplex. There
There you guys go. Right away, why not?
That's something that the city council has expressed interest in, and so currently there won't be any retail cannabis selling at the Fairplex nor cannabis-related events.
Judy St. John. I have two questions. I wonder, would it be possible to get a map of the various areas with the bordering streets named? Because this map doesn't show the names of the streets, you have to try to guess. Can I get that from you?
I think purposely that map was done that way because we weren't, because again, this was the first take, and so we purposely made them kind of nebulous blobs to give a general geographic area. The next iteration of this map certainly will be more in-depth and more parcel specific. So we do have a map that you can maybe zoom in a little bit more that will help you with defining, but we don't have a map that has all of the current streets on there yet. That map is forthcoming.
Will there be a chance for public input after you develop that next map?
Yes.
Okay. So then my second question is meant to be for the area just north of the 10 freeway between Fairplex and Dudley. I want to ask you to take into consideration the impact on traffic, the negative impact, because people use Gillette to go out onto Fairplex Drive, and Park and Ride uses that, but I use Fairplex Drive going north, and there have been times that cars coming out of Gillette just jet out into the lane of traffic before they stop. So I think if you establish a business there that's going to add more traffic, you're going to create real traffic problems.
And just to add to the street boundaries question, so since the CPA map has been released, we're receiving 20, 30 calls from real estate agents every day asking if they should go into escrow. So I want to answer that as the fifth question, is that there is no zoning in place yet. So if you're a realtor, if you're looking to invest right now, it's not in place. These zones are being developed, and when we do come up with that map, we'll have it more granular, we'll see the streets, and that's going to be the point of discussion.
My name is James Gill. I live in District 6, and I'm concerned about the same area the lady in front of me was talking about, Gillette and Dudley. It's basically in a residential neighborhood. There's a 7-Eleven store across the street or down the street. Then you have Denny's, which is right next to it, and then Pomona Valley Mine in town. Outside of that, it's completely surrounded by residential neighborhood. Now, there's a school right down the street. I don't know if you guys are like 1,000 foot. I think it's what it has to be. But outside of that, you have people, kids coming from the resident going to school. They're out riding on their bikes. They're on their skateboards and stuff. And I firmly don't believe that that site, proposal site, should be in a residential neighborhood. Because it is completely residential, outside of Denny's, 7-Eleven, and Pomona Valley Mining Company. That's it. It's completely surrounded by the neighborhood of residential. And I don't think it should be there.
My name is Austin Harnan, and my question is in regarding of sales. Would I be able to open up a shop that would make edibles? Would I be able to put that in a green location, or would it have to be in a red location? Because would it have to be separate between manufacturing and sales, or could it all be in one spot?
So edibles could be part of a retail business as part of edibles that you're selling. It could not be for on-site consumption of edibles. Certainly through, and also through a manufacturing permit, you could produce the manufacturing of edibles, depending on the type of permit that you had. If you had a micro business permit, which allows for manufacturing and retail, theoretically you could manufacture your own edible and then also sell.
I understand there'll be 2 retail licenses distributed, either storefront or delivery. So should those 2 companies potentially both be delivery? Would there not be a storefront in Pomona? And then why are those not 2 separate licenses, delivery and storefront?
Theoretically, yes. If it, right now, as it stands, what the council wants to consider is the 2 specifically retail, and then there's also a retail allowed with the micro business as well. So there's the 2 micro business as well. But theoretically, if 2 retail delivery only businesses were selected, then that would occupy the 2 retail licenses. There still would be an opportunity within the micro business to allow for storefront retail.
Hello, I'm Richard Parr. I have a couple questions. First of all, when you said other cities, you expounded there was Long Beach, LA, Oakland. Those are very large cities with a very big populace with a big police force. I'm curious to know what the police department has to say about this. I haven't heard anything. I've heard any expounding on that, so I'm really interested in that. The other thing I would ask is, you said social equality, or equity, excuse me, and you said that the person would have a fraction, say possession. Would that also entail somebody who was caught actually dealing, trafficking? I mean, what are the rules there on that? I'm kind of curious about that, where you guys are finding that parameter. And the other thing is, I live near CPA 9, and I'm curious why Pasadena Street was there. I assume it's because Pasadena and Town Avenue, there's a retail facility there, and there's a gym and so forth. I assume that's probably considered there because it turns over quite a bit. I would highly suggest not doing that because Town Avenue is a freeway up and down traffic and dangerous for people to park and getting out of cars. So keep it down on hold would probably be a really good idea. That's it. Thank you.
So for the CPA 9, again, that's, we'll call them blobs for lack of a better term, but when we're kind of making that more nebulous area, it sometimes captures either the single families or the parks, again, intentional to avoid real estate speculation, but it wouldn't be in a residential zone, but we would consider your input that you just gave on that particular area. With respect to the rehabilitation and what kinds of things we're looking at there, that's still in definition, we're still defining that. So Anita had mentioned we have to develop an implementation guide. That's a guide that actually gets adopted by the city council, and it's how we actually set fees and implement everything that we're wanting to put out. We're still a ways from that. The first step is really getting that map going. But as part of that implementation guide, we're gonna have to have a conversation about what criminal records, or maybe no-goes, which are on the table and which aren't, maybe out there. Memory's failing me, the first question you had.
The police department about the cities, the large.
So, yes, so, so we're, that was a great question. Those aren't the only cities we're talking to, first off. We're the closest in size and square mileage and population to us is Pasadena. And we were in conversation with them just in terms of scope. We've talked to West Hollywood, Santa Ana, those kinds of cities. We're looking at what Moreno Valley's doing, what's going on in Palm Springs. In some cases, what's important as we define this zoning, and I think somebody asked a question about this, is that Pomona's relationship to these cities geographically, and as we look at our zoning for distribution, what is our unique geography versus, say, Pasadena or Palm Springs and LA and distancing and things like that. The police department is continually to be involved in this process. They will be reviewing the maps that we will be preparing. They're attending our community meetings, our code enforcement team as well. And so that's an ongoing conversation we're having as well.
Thank you.
I am Fred Van Allen. I'd like to correct the previous speaker. Town is actually a drag strip. I live a couple blocks away from it. Full disclosure, I have not inhaled since 1972. But I'd like to make a comment on, I think it's social equity. I lived about 50 feet away from a illegal marijuana sales store. And for about 50 years, that location was an escrow office. And I lived near that escrow office for 10 years, and it was crickets. It might as well have been a senior citizen's home. That escrow business goes out of business, and an illegal marijuana shop enters, and all of a sudden, my life changes. Litter, drug dealing, automobile accidents, nefarious activities going on all night long. So my question is the clientele going to be different for these legal facilities? And if the clientele is the same clientele, what is going to be taking place to keep the neighborhoods or the local businesses insulated from any activity that I happen to be harmed by?
Thank you. I think part of the benefit of having a legal operation is that they have to comply with the regulations that we're putting in place. So for instance, part of the application process is a security plan, cameras, safe locations of any monies that are being stored on site. Again, Tom mentioned the development standards for facade improvements, the way people move through a site, no loitering. And so there will be, through that process and having a regulated site, there will be additional measures, whereas right now, there's nothing in place for illegal businesses. So that's the hope, is by having a legal business, it's controlled, it's regulated through those measures, and we have a lot more ability to, if there's a bad operator, to revoke that permit.
Thank you.
My name is Doug Murray. I live over in District 1, over in the area by the park and ride and all that thing the other resident was discussing. If that area was going to be chosen, it seems like the only practical area would be on the same side of the street where the Lemon Tree Hotel is, because there's a possibility of parking there that won't get in the way of the existing traffic. But the area down here by Holt and Fairplex is far more appropriate. I can't see any negative impact to that area. If you've been there, it couldn't get worse, and honestly, I think we would improve the area. I think we would improve it.
No, yeah, I just wanted to point out in relation to that, when you're looking at these CPAs, there is a distance requirement as well. So two retails couldn't be 1,000 feet near each other. So that's something to keep in mind, because in some cases, these CPAs run the length of 1,000 feet as well.
Hi, I'm a Pomona resident and homeowner. I was just wondering why it looks like downtown is complete. There's no zoning for a commercial storefront in downtown. And we all know there's a lot of empty storefronts, and the place could use some more foot traffic. I don't think there's an elementary school there or anything. I was wondering if that's a concern for business owners that are already there, or PD, or...
There's two reasons for that. One is that the interest of the city council was to not see cannabis businesses in downtown, so this is why it was specifically excluded. Second reason, been there. Second reason is there is actually two schools within the downtown. The SAY, there's two of the SAYs located on Monterey and Gary. Three schools. So even if the direction of the city council was not to include downtown, most likely all of it would be out anyway. That downtown area is a 3,000 foot radius, and so with 1,000 foot buffers of those, they'd probably already be out.
All right, thank you. A few minutes ago, you were talking about collective bargaining agreements, and I think one of your slides made a reference to making the project like labor friendly. I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about that?
As part of the business ordinance, there is a provision in there if you have 5 or more employees and you are involved in a collective bargaining agreement, there is additional points awarded for that application, as well as a labor and peace agreement. There's additional points.
Thank you. My name is Gregory. I had a question about some of the signage restrictions that you mentioned. Well, I suppose really my primary question is how is the banning of green crosses equitable with just the liquor stores you see across the city with martini glasses and bottles and that sort of thing on top of that? Do you think that might be sort of restricting the culture of marijuana? Don't you want to see people sort of express themselves in the decoration of their stores? And I mean, is the aim of the provision of the restriction of these sort of aesthetic markers an attempt to please people who are not going to be happy to have these stores in their neighborhoods anyway? So, your thoughts?
It's a great question. When I mentioned green crosses, that was not my intent. So it's not intended to make a comment on the culture or anything like that. But just using it as an example of signage restrictions we've seen as we've looked at other cities. As part of that conversation, and this is our own sign code and our base code, there are legal limitations on even free speech on what we can impose on signage. So that's something we're also investigating, is what is the extent to which we can even regulate that. But again, that wasn't a comment on any kind of intentionality of precluding cannabis in relation to other types of consumption.
I think overall the intent is to ensure that the retail businesses that have a presence in the city blend in to the city that we have and not necessarily stand out. I think that's the point behind all of that. Any other questions?
My name is David, I'm a Pomona resident. Do you guys have any plans to make on-site consumption a thing? Say where we can go to a bar and the bar provides us with, say, we both joints, or if we can maybe go to like a dab bar or anything like that?
Currently, no. We do not have plans to allow on-site consumption. Oh, Mary?
One of the things I just want to express, and this may have been expressed earlier, my apologies, I just came from a San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments meeting and I had to leave early, so my apologies for not being here on time. One of the things I think is really important to appreciate is the spectrum of views on cannabis. Some folks have no problem with illegal dispensaries. Some folks have no problems with crosses. Some folks don't ever want to see it in their community at all. But the fact of the matter is that part of the reason why we're starting off small is the importance of building trust in the community. Because there's a lot of unknowns to people when you start putting now a legal cannabis business in a community. And I've had the chance to visit a number of them, and I walk into them, and they look nothing like the illegal dispensaries I've seen in the city. Nothing. And the commitment that they have to ensuring that the community is a partner is critical to the long-term success. Because if this fails, the community is going to come out against this very hard. And so I just want to just state that because I think it's important to appreciate the spectrum of views, but by starting conservatively and showing that it can work, and that the community can see all the things that they think are going to happen as a result of that new business don't happen, that perhaps maybe the community may be open to more. And that's not to say the council is going to do that, but I think that's really critical. The trust factor is really critical to the success, not just of the business, but of the community. And fundamentally, it has to be successful for the community because we have to live here, right? Most of the proprietors that will open up these businesses don't live in this community. But I know that as good partners, and one of the components of the process is they have to present, the finalists have to present in front of the community. And all of you hopefully will be there, and you can ask them very pointed questions. What are you going to do? How are you going to address this issue? And that helps us to make, I think, a better decision. So, thank you.
Hi, thank you. Okay, my question is, well, I have a comment, two. One is about the area between Fairplex and Gillette. That area is, as one of the gentlemen said, residential, and the police are currently looking at lowering the speed limit going through that area to 25 miles an hour because it's residential. So that also adds to traffic and the other things people mentioned. The corner of Gillette and Fairplex, there's no signal unless you go on the freeway, and it's already dangerous to go down that freeway because you have traffic on the freeway rushing through. Some of it is going back on the 10, some of it is coming up to turn left onto Fairplex. Those people that are trying to enter on sometimes get bottlenecked there, especially if a car on the other side stops. So that will bottleneck that whole thing, and it's accident prone. The part where you go up Gillette, where the park and ride is, and you try to turn there, there's no light. And it's a blind curve coming down that hill where the people speed down that roadway. It's hard for people to leave out of that restaurant to turn off onto there because there's not a mirror or anything there that shows you anything. So that whole area is dangerous. Plus you have the elementary school down there, 7-Eleven, and Ganesha High is off of Fairplex. So all those kids are migrating up through that area because it's all residential. So that's what I have to say about that. The second thing is one of the gentlemen here mentioned something about equity, the social equity. One of the things that I see that's going on in our city is that you have people that are buying up property, speculating. They're speculating, and what it does is because you need a location in order to do a business, possibly eliminates what might be some good applications or good businesses, or it X's out individuals who live in the community, who have funds significant enough to make this happen, but not willing to spend multiple millions of dollars because you got some unscrupulous real estate agents either telling their clients don't lease to any of these businesses, sell only because that creates a fake seller's market. You got reflipping properties that sold 3 months ago that may be worth $100,000 and now selling it at $3.5 million. So there's a lot of things that's going on, and that I know it's difficult within the process to look at that, but you need to be aware of that. So in the categories that you have, you might want to consider some of the social things that either residents or people who are here, foundationally here, have to be able to combat that financial influx that some of these outside businesses are trying to do.
Hi, my name is Gina Carlson, and I'm a resident of Pomona. And so I have kind of a couple of comments and questions. We've been living in this city for 18 years, and because of certain things, it seems like that go on in the community of Pomona and some of the things that you see in the media, it makes me want to move. But I have really great neighbors, and my kids don't want to move, and so when I think about this industry coming into our neighborhoods, I really am concerned about the city overall. I don't know if it was Fred that mentioned, but one was mentioning about safety. And I don't know if this is the right forum to address that, or if you're going to have other meetings specific to that, but when there's other issues going on in the city, have you looked at the areas that you have highlighted? How is the safety of that neighborhood going to be controlled? We live near Fairplex. I don't necessarily see any more police in my neighborhood during that time when crime is going up, because you have people coming in the neighborhood, not just when it's a fair time or things like that, but I think people probably in this room want to hear, well, we're gonna look at the, patrolling increasing by 10%. We're going to hire more officers. That is really the biggest concern, because you were mentioning, the type of people who are going to get the permits, but that still doesn't stop the traffic and everything else. So while they may be up to so many standards, we can't say that their clients are that way. So I think hearing more specifics about a safety standpoint, what's going to happen. Because it is about the owner of the business, but it's also about the others coming into the neighborhood. You mentioned 2 retail areas. So again, is 2 retail areas too small? Will that cause more crime? Have you looked at that? Just because I have a concentrated area. We want our home values to stay the same, or not stay the same, but get better. So with more crime or safety issues, how is that looked at? So for me, those are really the main things. And when you talk about building trust, it's important that we know we are in a safe community. If we're not seeing what we think we should be seeing now, sometimes, although this is not to say the Pomona Police Departments, they're doing what they can, and I read on Nextdoor all of the great things that they are doing. But what is your response to what is the beginnings of a safety plan?
So I think on the safety point, as Tom mentioned earlier, we are coordinating with PD and as on an ongoing basis as we develop this zoning piece. I think certainly in terms of safety, that is a factor that we'll be taking into consideration. As we're looking at these different zones, again, this initial map was just that first take of where businesses could go that aren't in a sensitive use. And now we're evaluating where residential are, where are these areas really at, and where do we want them? So certainly we're definitely taking a very close look, block by block, on what areas we would recommend they be in. So I don't know that we couldn't commit to additional officers per se, but we are definitely in discussions with PD, and they're involved in the city process of evaluating this ordinance. And in terms of safety plans, again, part of the entire application process is that these businesses have a security plan. Of the ones that we visited, everyone has had a very secure location, security plan, highly securitized with cameras, guards, very well secured. All the businesses that we have seen, and we would expect to have the same here in Pomona, is a requirement of that business license.
Hello, my name is Ricardo Perez. I've been living in Pomona for about 34 years, homeowner since 1985. My point of view in here is more like nobody says they don't want to have it, they just don't want to have it next to their own house. But, everybody wants it. So, my point in here is probably what we need is to get a little bit more educated on what we're talking about in here and how we're going to understand, what's going on and what's going to be good for us and what is going to be bad for us, and especially about our younger kids, our little kids. I don't have much younger kids anymore because I'm a kind of old guy already, but grandkids and stuff like that. So my question is this: how is this whole thing gonna work with the schools and with the community, trying to educate and help the kids to understand what's going on? Because guess what? This is not going anywhere else. It's gonna stay. It's gonna be like the birria, alcohol. Yeah. Nobody wanted it, but nobody wanted it close to the houses. The mothers went on strike all over the place and still end up staying and being legal. But not until you understand and you educate yourself, then you can control it. And if you keep putting it to the side and pushing it to the closer neighbor, instead of your own area, thinking that guy is not going to drive all motor to your house, it's not going to work. I think it's more like We need to know what's going on. We need to be aware that this is going on and be a community. Be a community instead of being, this is my spot and that's your spot and your house looks uglier than mine. You know? So it's more like let's educate ourselves. Let's see how you guys are going to do it once this business prospers, how they're going to help the kids to understand the goods and the bads of this business, and especially to understand what drug is. And I mean, it's going on right now. Everybody knows, everybody buys it wherever they can get it. And of course, if you make it legal, you make it taxable, you try to control it on an educated way, you're gonna have profit, you're gonna have business, and you're gonna have probably a way a lot easier to communicate and explain how to understand and how to explain to our kids what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I live here. The city council lives here. It's our community, it's our neighborhood. When this issue first came up after it was passed statewide, I was probably the most conservative member of the council. And in fact, I'm not even sure I would have voted yes a couple of years ago, because I had a lot of the reservations that many of you may have. And through a process of evolution and a process of research, I know illegal dispensaries are here in Pomona, and there are social consequences for illegal dispensaries. In fact, our police have to spend an inordinate amount of resources to shut them down. And it isn't as if there's taxes coming in to pay our police to do that extra work. Okay? And we used to have a lot of those, but we have less and less, and maybe we're down to one, maybe two. But where am I going with this? So one of the things I did is I actually went and visited a business in Long Beach, in Belmont Shores. And if you know anything about Belmont Shores, it's a nice neighborhood. And right next to a children's photography business was a cannabis business that was retail. And you would never have been able to tell that it was a cannabis business. It didn't have anything to indicate that it certainly didn't have a green cross. It looked like a sunglass hut. That's it. And even in legal dispensaries, you have people who are professors, you have doctors, you have a range of people. I think it's really important that when you look at the issue around crime, is you have to look at it in terms of understanding the difference between people who typically go to these cannabis businesses and those who are involved in illegal activity, irrespective of whether they're legal or illegal. And one of the big, big issues in the state is how we penalize people for certain types of crimes. Right? With the changes in 47, 57, 109, now the law it's a slap on the hand. And I'm not suggesting that people should be going to prison, but by the same token, a slap on the hand certainly doesn't do anything to alleviate some of the petty crimes, quality of life crimes that happen. But we're talking about folks who are just law-abiding people who go to these businesses. So why do I say that? Because that was helpful for me in my own evolution, is that we're not talking about the illegal dispensary on North Park Avenue where it's dark and the windows are closed and people are walking in and they're looking around. These are legitimate businesses. And it's so important that these businesses are successful for the investor. So they want to make sure that it's safe. They don't want kids to be coming over there and asking somebody to buy them edibles. And the fact that we're starting off really with few numbers is critical, because we're going to learn a lot. But we're not going in this saying, hey, listen, like some other cities, all come in. In fact, there's some on the council before who believe that let's open it up to any and all. And there's some of you probably that feel that way. I don't. I really feel that we have to demonstrate that we build that trust, and if we do it well, we can grow it if it makes sense for this community. That's my view. So I want to allay some of your concerns. I'm not saying there's going to be an absence of crime, but I can tell you these businesses are going to do everything they can to ensure that the area in and around their businesses are going to be safe. Because they can't afford to fail. There's so much money and risk in opening up a cannabis business today. But part of what I would encourage you to do is when we have the meeting, the community meeting, those are the types of pointed questions you should ask them. One last thing, the police chief at the last cannabis meeting that we had has called other police chiefs where cannabis is allowed. And he asked, are you having problems with those businesses? And the chief, other chiefs have told our chief, no. Problem is not with legal dispensaries or businesses, it's the illegal dispensaries that are the problem. And I think again, it goes back to, this is like a legitimate business model. As hard as it is for us to get over the idea that marijuana, you know, me growing up, that was just, you just didn't do that. You know, not, some of my friends did, but not, I didn't do it. So. And by the way, I'm happy to give you my number. I'm going to give it to you now. Let me keep this. 909-762-1982. 909-762-1982. I know some of you may not want to ask questions. You call me. If you have concerns, you can tell me. If you have questions, I'll do my best to answer. Okay? Sorry.
I think that was my cell phone number.
Okay, so I'm going to convey my question in the most polite way possible, but everyone that I'm listening to sounds concerned for the crime, the speed, the traffic, all that. I don't know what part of Pomona you live in, but you guys are, it's scary. Pomona is scary sometimes. I have a business below the train tracks, and the fire department said, hey, when it gets dark, you should leave here. Right by my business, it's like a dumping ground for dead dogs, trash, and furniture. So anything that brings revenue, I don't know why we're so concerned about the crime that is already here. There's places in Pomona you can't walk on the sidewalk because of homeless encampments. So I guess my question is, with the additional revenue, are we going to aggressively tackle some of these issues that they're a problem? The homeless, and I'm not saying no disrespect to homeless, but the trash, the hookers, I mean, honestly, and this sounds really bad because I live here and I do love Pomona, but I think Pomona could use a lot of improvements. I think someone maybe coming to move here would be turned off by some of the elements. Even downtown Pomona looks dingy, looks run down and sad, and there's so much potential. There really is so much potential in the city, but I hope with the revenue, we don't see increases in city worker salaries. I hope we see a really big change because Pomona, in certain areas and at certain times, is a scary place. And so I'm more excited about the revenue coming in, and I don't think dispensaries bring that much crime that isn't already happening.
Thank you for your words. I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. I don't see my community that way. Okay, now hang on.
I said it was amazing.
Yeah. I don't see my community
A
that way.
lot of people do.
Yeah, I don't.
Well, you should if you work here.
No, I live here.
At both ends.
Yeah, so not that I don't see challenges, but the reality is most of the things happening in this community are good things. The 160,000 people that live in this community are hardworking people, working class people, immigrant people, professors, doctors, attorneys, arrangement, and I'm not criticizing you. It's important for me as mayor because one of the challenges we face is an image problem, but when we buy into that, that hurts us as a city. So to answer your question about, we're going to generate tax dollars from this. The voters passed overwhelmingly a tax measure that would tax cannabis. So the city council, with community input, can decide how that's going to be used. I can tell you that the city council wants to use this for public safety. Okay? That's the primary use of the dollars is for public safety. But there's a caveat to that, okay? I'm a huge believer, having my background is in education. I was a teacher and I was a co-founder of a nonprofit that helps kids go to and graduate from colleges all over the country. It is critical in my view that we also make sure that we invest in our young people, so that way by investing on the front end, we don't what? Pay on the back end. And the reality is that when you look at the budget of the city, we spend very, very little in this budget of a couple of $100 million on programming for children. But our primary, in my view, and if you ask me to vote on this today, I would say those dollars need to go specifically to public safety to help our officers to be able to oversee the types of issues that you're describing, which are real. By the way, I'm not here to suggest they're not real. They're real. Homelessness is real, drugs are real, grown men riding kids' bikes is real, okay? And we know what they're doing.
Prostitution
Okay.
down the street.
Yes, human trafficking. It was here when I was a kid, when I was 9 years old, we moved here. Okay, right? But the degree to, this is one last statement, the degree to which we work together is the degree to which we'll accomplish some really great things in this community. And that's, it takes, I can't speak for what happened in the past, although it's important to learn, but moving forward, right, talking about cleaning the community, I've got a group that goes out every Tuesday and Saturday that goes out and cleans the community. And they're all volunteers. And it includes business people and residents. Some of them are lifers who came out of prison. Some of them are seniors. Some of them are college students. And anybody can step up to do that kind of work. And the mindset is that government can't do everything, but that if we all contribute in some way, if we all take ownership, there's no reason why we can't address some of those issues. Because the fact of the matter is, we outnumber that small group of people that are causing the kind of disruption that impacts our quality of life. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Christy. I've lived here for 22 years, right across the street. Sir, what's your name? Ricardo. I'm going to pick up where Ricardo left off because I like what he said. I'm just going to continue with that. It is what he said. We want it, we just don't want it in our backyard. Probably a lot of us do it, we just don't want to admit it. But there's one thing that we're leaving out. And I want to get back to the community. We're a community. We're neighbors. I recognize some of you here. So you have to be concerned about your neighbors and their welfare. And that includes everything, crime and safety. You want to look out for your neighbors. But when it comes to the marijuana itself, the drug, that's the nasty word, the drug, we're leaving out the people who need it, the medical users. You cannot tell by looking at me, but I have what you call 3 invisible illnesses. And because of this opioid epidemic, sometimes I can't get my medicine. So I can't work. I can't get out of bed. I can't function as a human. I'm just stuck. And I need an option. And the cannabis is the option. It lets me heal. It makes me feel good. It lets me get out of bed. It lets me interact with friends and family, go to work. I need it. And there's a lot of people who need it. And I don't need to be driving to LA to get it. So we need to work out something to have I don't know if it's recreational or medical, but there's got to be some compromise because we're all neighbors.
And currently, the business ordinance allows for recreational and medicinal. I see a last few questions here, and then we can wrap it up, and then staff will be available after for any one-on-one questions that you may have.
Good evening. My question is, well, directly to the council member himself, about security. We know that there's a lot of illegal dispensaries in town. He stated one on North Park. 2 or 3 days ago, on the news, there was an armed robbery on the dispensary where a gun was discharged. It was, this exact dispensary was raided by the police department a week prior, and it was still operational a few days later. The very next day, it's still open, and it's still open today. How is the city closing these illicit dispensaries, and they're literally open the very next day? That's my
I think the mayor's comments previously addressed it too, is the hope that with the additional dollars to assist in additional police force with the shutting down of these businesses as
But
well.
you know that they're open right now. You know where they are. You've been knowing where they are.
They still need out a contract right now.
So
But it's not in any of the zones. And I understand that people need medicine, but I mean, these are illegal ones, not ran by entrepreneurs or business people.
Correct, that have no security plans and nothing to regulate them, and that's part of the problem. So, we heard your question, thank you. Any additional questions, sir?
Actually, more of a statement. The lady who had blonde hair, black dress, I know your name. Baldwin Park charge for applications, and one of the charges is $50,000 to hire a police officer. They can do that here. In openness, I don't live in Pomona, I live in Laverne, I have a business. Homelessness is not going away, not with the present government, just the way it is. And the laws that the mayor said about the full jails, nah, it ain't going away. So application-wise, I think you can do something by charging higher fees. It might discourage.
That only allows big business to come in and own the business.
It does,
The money
but-
that the pop brings in, the business is bringing, can take
It
care of all
does.
the issues we addressed.
It does. Taxes will bring,
More than enough.
Yes.
That single applicant should be
exactly,
required.
exactly. I just wanted to say there are things that can be done. Unfortunately, for big business, we all suffer with that.
Thank you, sir. Currently, we don't have a set price on business permits. That's something we are evaluating and will be set before we're ready to accept applications, obviously. And one last question, okay? I think you haven't had a question yet, so I think that'll be it. Okay.
I just wanted to say I'm really proud of Pomona that we're addressing this issue. A lot of cities adopt the issue, I mean 80% not even allowing it. And I did some research worldwide, I do research for a living. Pomona as a city is larger than most of the cities in Europe. We're a powerhouse. We don't realize that we are. Anyway, I'm just really proud of the city. Ooh, that's a great note to pick up on. I'm turning 33 this year. I'm a junior, so I've been here my entire life. Yeah, I've been here my entire life. I went to Royal, Marshall, Ganesha. So it's that community that is eye level with Gillette Road, you know, just level with the rest of us. Remember, I used to look up from Rose Playground and see the billboard on the hill and try to read it from the playground. We're also right by the Burger King and the welfare department, that area that can't be affected by this use apparently. I love my city. I remember going to Ganesha and having the kids refer to it mockingly as Pomona, right? Now, we live in Pomona, right? I love my city. We used to walk down to 2nd Street after high school every day to go see punk rock shows downtown and walk back to close to what we call Sin Town and all this area in the middle of probably 11:30 at night. And I gotta tell you, it might not look safe, but if you're not out there looking for trouble, at least in my experience, maybe it's because I'm 6'4" and a big guy, but I never had a problem. It is a beautiful city to grow up in. I love my city. We used to, me and my sister and some of my friends who grew up on the same little cul-de-sac, we used to ride our bikes and walk all the way over to Ganesha Park. There used to be this tunnel that went underneath the freeway that's now blocked off that we used to go under, and we enjoyed it. We used to go swimming, go flatten pennies on the railroad tracks across the street from Holt, near where I grew up, the terrible part of town. Just a beautiful city to grow up in. It's been my experience. Because we probably have 9 different households in the city, it's all family.
some over in Westmont, some over down on the south side, and us over here on the west side. People used to walk down to 71, avoiding traffic on the way back to Westmont. Downtown might look dingy to you. To me, it looks beautiful. I can't believe what it's turned into. There's businesses there now. There's businesses there now. It's a beautiful thing to see it happen. And the fact that now, this use, that believe me, growing up in the hood, this use has always been there. These people that you don't call entrepreneurs, they've always been there. All right, sure, they're not entrepreneurs by definition, they're not legal actors. They're always there. And I can't believe that I've lived long enough to see this use be legitimized, hopefully come out of the damn shadows so that the crime elements in the city aren't benefiting from them anymore, and benefit the rest of us. It's a beautiful thing to see. And I hope that with the continuing growth of our city, the continuing progress, because it really is progress. Take it from someone who's remember seeing lowriders pass by Arroyo in '92 when I was walking back home from school. It's progress, and I hope it continues. I don't see traffic getting any worse on Fairplex than it does in the fairs in town. I would love to see businesses on Gillette Road that are not empty gas station, empty lot, or a burned down office building. And if they're a pot dispensary, well shit, at least it's not on the corner of the school, it's at least on the other side of the damn overpass. I was a little kid, they used to walk those streets, and thank God that it's in a store and not on the corner. Thank you. Oh, I actually did have some questions. So I'm sorry, I'm personally invested in the city, I can't help it, but, so there's no real clear zoning for cultivation. I'm wondering, where is cultivation going to be allowed, or where is it not going to be allowed by right? Secondly, downtown. Okay, so we don't want pot next to our schools. I know for a fact that there's a bar across the street from one of the schools in downtown. And both in downtown and off of Gillette Road, the market that you'd be targeting with that product would be people coming from other cities. Our own community doesn't go downtown. We go to other cities to go shop. I don't know about you guys. I started to shop downtown when I got older, but most of the time we went to Chino, to Claremont, to Montclair, because you guys closed on the mall for some reason. All right, well, so cultivation and retail in downtown.
So cultivation and the map on there is included in the pink zone, so manufacturing, testing, distribution, cultivation. Anywhere where there's pink, that's where we're contemplating cultivation as well. And again, reiteration, those may change and where we're contemplating in different zones, but pink represents inclusive of cultivation. And as far as downtown, the current business ordinance defines it as a sensitive use. And again, that's not the intent of the current business ordinance at this time. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Thank you to Councilmember Cole. You have any closing words? Thank you very much. And staff will be here, all up here up front. If you have any remaining questions, we're happy to answer them. Our contact information is up on the screen. Please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate